thinking about why we're here, what's the focus of today. Always there's a lot of people who are going to be doing things around mid-year alignment, mid-year workshops. And I talked a little bit about this on that video yesterday. Business planning without accountability is just a form of escapism. So taking time out of your day today to be with me, although I enjoy seeing you all here, it needs to be more than just you taking time out of your day. We really want to make sure that you are applying everything that we're talking about here. You're taking a deep dive and looking at your numbers. It doesn't help you to look at examples if we're not going to go into your numbers, your structure, the thing that is necessary for you and your business. This is just a little bit of a preview of what that workbook looks like. Shantae has done a great job of pulling some of our tools together, things that are going to be references for you. We're going to be talking about business planning. We're going to be talking about the pillars of your business. We're also going to be talking about ways of managing your time, managing your schedule. Shantae has done a fantastic job of building together weekly planners, ways for you to be able to look at your marketing calendar. So please make sure that you're downloading that planner. And if you can all just help me in joining and saying a quick thank you to Shantae for all of the work that she has been doing for us in preparation for the mid-year alignment. Shantae, I appreciate you. And I know that everyone here is very appreciative of you as well. So let's get right into the concept of why we're here, why goals matter, why we're doing business planning, why you're taking time out of your afternoon to be here with me. We've all heard of this study, and maybe you have, maybe you haven't. There's a study that was done by Harvard in which they took a graduating class of MBA students and they assessed those members of that class and they asked them how many of them had goals. They found that 13% of the room had goals, but they weren't necessarily written down. They had 68% of the room did not have any goals at all, and the remainder were individuals that had clearly defined written goals. And what they found is that they tracked that party over the course of 20 years. They came back and they looked at what was going on in their world, and they realized that of the 13% that had clearly defined goals, even though they weren't written down, they had done twice the amount of income and net worth as those that had no goals at all. And those that had clearly defined written goals had 10 times the results of everyone else combined. So you might ask the question, well, why does that matter? So many people move through life on autopilot, and you might even find yourself in times of the year of moving through autopilot. I want to be very clear that during this time together, there is no shame, there is no blame. We want to use this as a moment of awareness and going, what can I do at this moment moving forward? So if the first half of the year has not been the greatest year for you, don't let that be the way that you write off the rest of the year. Use this as a moment to assess where you are, what were some of the things that worked for you, what are some of the things that haven't worked for you, and making sure that we set intentions around how we're using our activities. So thinking about goals and why goals matter, it gives us a North Star. It allows us to make sure that our activities are in alignment with something larger than the day-to-day. Usually around June, this is when a lot of people start to feel burnout. And as much as we don't really love that word, the idea of burnout is really just when our activities are not in alignment with our goals. We go too long with just kind of going through the motions. And so I would love to take a pulse check of those of you that are already on here right now. How many of you are on track for your goals, looking at things at the mid-year, or let's even go a step further? How many of you started the year with goals? Go ahead and put it in the chat box for me if you had clearly defined, written down goals at the beginning of the year. So Brandon said yes. Shantae, Mashonda. Mary said she had clearly defined written goals, just needed help with accountability. Absolutely. Amy said 100%. Yes, you did. Chelsea said yes. Okay, so with the goals that you set at the beginning of the year, how many of you wandering in the wilderness? Well, we'll get to that, Jason, especially when you and I have a call on Tuesday. But the idea of us looking at those clearly defined goals, how many of you are on track with the goals that you had set in December? Okay. So Brandon said not even close. Mashonda said no. There's a few other people that are looking somewhat, right? And again, the one thing about goals that's fascinating when we become results oriented versus being process oriented is that when we're results oriented, we're also not factoring in all of the other things that are going on in the universe, right? When I sit down and I put paper to pen in December, it's the season of joy and gift giving, and we had a great year. And I just think that the next year is going to be beautiful, perfect. I'm not factoring in any other factor that is going on in the world. I'm not thinking about interest rates. I'm not thinking about the world economy. I'm not thinking about things that are happening in my local area. I'm not thinking about maybe my own capacity, my own wellness, maybe things that are going on in my family, health of members of our family, parents. So there are so many things that happen. So oftentimes when we look at the goals and only look at the goals and we don't necessarily look at the things that are happening in our world, we can be discouraged. And there might be some of you that are on this call today that are feeling a little bit discouraged because you set all these goals, you had all these wonderful intentions, and then life maybe got in the way. We have to remember why we set goals. It's a North Star, but it is not necessarily a prescription of saying that if you don't do this, that life is going to be horrible. We use that North Star as the guide to make sure that our activities are in alignment with what we want for ourselves. And so I want to make sure that we have this idea that goals are a living, breathing aspect. It is a lifestyle more than it is something that you do in the middle of the year, and it's something that you do in December, right? So let's all kind of give ourselves permission, whether you are on track or you are not on track with the goals that you set in December, is we have to look in the moment as it is right now and go, which parts of this are available, which parts of this are adjustable, which parts of this are in my control and outside of my control. So thinking a little bit of this and as a reminder, what is the purpose of business? And so I really would love, I know that some of you might know that there's a canned answer to this, but I would really love to know from you, what is the purpose of business for you? Go ahead and put it in the chat box for me, please. All right, so Jason said freedom. Okay, so the purpose of business, I'm assuming, then give me a little bit more of that. Maybe that looks like financial freedom. Stephen said to fund the perfect life, right? Naveen said to provide for my family both time and money. Brandon, to be able to live the life that I want and to give back to my community. Absolutely, to create my ideal life, to fund my lifestyle and freedom. Now, I don't know about you, but I feel like when I'm working or when I am in business, I don't feel particularly free in that moment, right? I feel like there are obligations, to be 100% frank with all of you, right? Some of you have time. Some of you have my time, right? I think Mary and I have a call every Monday afternoon, right? The idea of that necessarily equaling freedom is talking about the freedom to create a life by design. Thank you, Jason, for giving me the textbook answer, right? The purpose of business is to fund a life of intention. And so often we talk about this, and I love the analogy of thinking about, I just visualize a little girl, 6 years old, 8 years old, and she's in one of those revolving doors at a department store. And she goes around one time and she goes around a second time and she waves at everybody that's on the inside and the outside, realizing that the revolving door is a tool for us to get from the outside into the department store or from the department store outside. There are many people in our world, I'm sure that you know them, you might even be them, or you might be very close to them, in which their business becomes their personality. Their business and work becomes all that they can talk about, all that they can think about. And so it's almost like that little girl that's inside the revolving door who never leaves, but she's waving. So to be very, very clear, we want you to have a successful business. We want you to be highly profitable. We want you to have clearly defined goals around your business to be able to build that life that you're talking about, but don't forget about the life that you're talking about. So I'm curious, for those of you that had set some goals at the end of last year, what were some lifestyle things that you said that you wanted to do this year for yourself or for your family? Was there a particular trip that you wanted to do this year? Was there a certain amount of money that you wanted to save? Were you thinking about investing, maxing out your 401k, adding to your home? Talk to me about some of those life things that you wanted to accomplish or experience this year that you had identified at the end of last year. From time to time, those of you that maybe don't know me on a personal level, that was a live question. You're going to hear me say that that's a live question, which means that I am posing that question to you and I am expecting an answer. My questions are not necessarily rhetorical. They're not always loaded, but they absolutely do require a response. So let's see. Mary said to network more and meet more people. That was one of your goals. Absolutely. Talk to me about lifestyle things, maybe trips or things that you wanted to do with the purpose of business. Amy wanted to do some restructuring, and restructuring Amy did, that's for sure. Brandon said to take my husband on a 2-week trip to South Africa for his 40th birthday. Well, that sounds fun. Shantae said family cruise and funding retirement account. She's halfway done. The family cruise did happen that I know of, unless there's another one, please let me know. Steven said travel. Chelsea said take time for myself. Now, Mary, yes, congratulations, Mary, on her recent engagement. We'll all wish Mary and her fiance a wonderful married life. They have to plan a fun wedding party. Naveen says, I haven't had any goals per se, just on autopilot. Okay, well, this is a moment of assessment. Looking at being halfway at the year, you might have said, I'm going to get in shape this year. I'm going to eat healthier this year. I'm going to take money out of each one of my commission checks, or I'm going to take money out of my budget for each month, and I'm going to put it towards this bigger goal. Well, in the absence of larger goals, like what we're talking about, it is easy to pacify our needs by the next shiny object. How many of you would say that you are shiny object syndrome people? It's very easy for you to get distracted. There are new ideas or new concepts, and it always kind of pulls you in one way or the other. Yeah. Many of you would be self-diagnosed in that way. Maybe some of you have been medically diagnosed in that way. The idea is to understand that being a squirrel, there are no disciplined people. There are people who have discipline, and there are people who have mastered self-control or are on the path to mastering self-control. Even those that you think time block everything and that they have everything figured out still find these moments of distraction. The problem is that in the absence of a larger goal, those shiny objects look totally justifiable because they're not taking the place of something else. Going back to why we have to have clearly defined goals, why we need to take time for ourselves to cast a vision of what we want our future to look like, is so that when we start to feel ourselves moving in another direction, it's not to feel shame and blame. It is to have a level of awareness of going back to the things that we wanted for ourselves. And I find so often that actually people get inundated with their work and busy, especially if they're coming from a scarcity mindset, especially if the first half of the year was maybe not as lucrative as they wanted for themselves, that they end up finding themselves digging further into the business, delaying any more of those things that they talked about in terms of that life by design, those things that they wanted for themselves, right? So we want to be very, very clear that the purpose of business is to fund that life by design. If you want to gamify any part of business outside of just making money, is how can I differentiate what is busy work, right? The busyness, BUSYNESS, versus the business, BUSINESS, right? And we think about those two letters that change. When I am doing busyness, that why, I start asking myself questions like, why am I not on my goals? Why am I not getting the results that I'm looking for? Why do I not feel comfortable and confident with what I'm doing? When it's the business, that I, instead of the why, it's I take control. I am the one who is the master of my ship, right? So we really want to move away from feeling like we need to do the busyness work. Oh, I've got to feel like I've got to fill the void of time, versus the business. If I can focus on business and I can do exactly what I need to do, then take the afternoon, spend time with your family, spend time with your children, go lay in the pool, do the things that you've earned because you've held yourself accountable. We're going to get into this a little bit further when we talk about time blocking and time management. But just think about the idea of how much of your time you're focused on the busyness work versus the business. And this is a wonderful time to do an assessment. So kind of give yourself a gauge. If it's 60-40, 50-50, 70-30, go ahead in the comment section and tell me, what do you think is your ratio of working for the busyness aspect of your day-to-day versus the business, the things that are income producing, the things that actually move the needle of your business? What would you say your day makeup is consisting of? Okay, so Naveen saying 70% busyness, 30% business. Mary saying 60% business, 40% busyness, right? But that varies day by day, absolutely. 60-40 busy, okay. 50%, so 50-50 for Mashonda, 50-50 for Amy, 50-50 for Chelsea, 60-40 for Stephen. Great. So the thing is like that busyness aspect of your time is time that, quite frankly, you're just choosing not to spend with your family. Now, before anybody is like, hold on, shots fired. What I mean is, if it really isn't affecting the income, which is the thing that you told me was the purpose of business, why are you doing it? Is it so that you feel productive even if you're not? Is it because the inverse of that is to look lazy or to deal with what society tells you to do? Right? We don't get brownie points for working 50, 60, 70 hours a week of busyness if it doesn't equate to income. And I know that there's quite a few people that are on here who are real estate agents. And so I'm going to paint a picture for you that I'm sure that you know who this person is. Now, I'm not actually painting a specific person, so please don't put a person's name in the chat box. But I want you to think of, like, do you know this character, right? It is a person who is in the office sometimes first thing in the morning. They're usually there until late afternoon. They attend all the trainings. They go to all the sales meetings. They drink all the free coffee, and yet they have zero production. Do you know this person? Go ahead and put that in the chat section for me, please, if you know who I'm talking about. For sure, right? That is the quintessential busy person that is not actually focused on what is real, what is right with business. And so this is the aspect, which is there's a lot of things that can look like you are working. And quite frankly, you're not. So getting really clear on this is, I would love for you to work 30 hours a week. I'd love for you to work 20 hours a week. I'd love you to work whatever time you want to be working on being highly effective with your time, as opposed to just filling it with busyness, because the inverse of that is maybe my spouse, partner, significant other is going to think that I'm lazy if I'm not in the office from this time to this time. Or society is going to think that I'm not doing what I need to do. Right? We have to get really clear about what that time looks like. Right? And I use this example often. Let's say that Mashonda and I go to the gym 3 days a week. And Mashonda does a full body circuit workout for 2 hours a day, those 3 days a week that we go. And I go with her, but I do a 16-minute walk warm up. And then the rest of the time, I'm taking photos of myself in the mirror, and I'm refilling our water bottles, and I'm talking to Mashonda and maybe spotting her every once in a while. Now, we both can claim that we were at the gym for 2 hours a day, 3 days a week, yet Mashonda's results and my results are going to look very, very different. That's where we need to get away from this concept of the time on task or time dedicated to something is somehow a level of efficiency, because it's not, right? We get really real with ourselves on how much of our time is being focused on business versus busyness, and start to cut the things away that aren't serving you. Because if it's not making you money, why do it? Okay. Any thoughts on this before we move on to the next slide? Maybe some ahas or evaluations around that busyness aspect. Maybe even examples of some of the things that you're doing that you know are busy work that's not necessarily helping you with your business. I, of course, have plenty of examples that I can give you, but I'd love to hear from you. So not putting the phone down, the G darn, phone down. Thank you for that, Mary. I appreciate that. Not putting the phone down and off of apps, right? So looking at some of those distractions that are there, the mindless scroll, watching a bunch of videos and going, oh my goodness, right? There is a level of awareness that's there. What else? What else is busyness that you're filling the day that is not necessarily dedicated to business? All right, cleaning my backyard because I have childcare and it makes it easier to do, but then I'm not doing business, right? Okay. So in both of these examples, these are actually things that aren't even business related, right? Like clearing out your backyard or, just kind of interacting on social media, not even interacting, consuming on social media, right? I think that that's another aspect of this, talking about, oh, I'm attending a networking event, but I actually don't talk to anyone, right? That would be a lack of purpose. I'm showing up to events, but then I'm standing in a corner and, Amy and I are just talking crap about the people that are in the room as opposed to networking and communicating with everybody that's there or setting goals around, I want to get 10 new business cards of new associates that I'm able to add to my database, add to my CRM that I can be communicating with. Right. That's the very difference between showing up to a 2-hour event because it has free cocktails and being very intentional that as I go to this networking event, this is the goal that I have of being there, right? Going back to why do we have goals? It's making sure that our activities are in alignment with what we have preset for ourselves so that we are not just the accumulation of subconscious choices, but that we are being intentional and we're conscious of the things that we do, right? I think another thing that I hear often is like, oh, I need to organize my desk. I need to organize my desk. I need to organize my office. Having a clear space is really going to help me. I understand. That is also something that you can do at 6 p.m. at night. It doesn't necessarily need to happen right during the time that you need to be focused on client acquisition, or you need to be doing those kinds of activities. That is a distraction that feels like because you're in the space of work, that is somehow helping with work. It's not. Organizing a pipeline, right? Not actually talking to anybody, but moving names around or making pretty forms in Excel files is a form of busyness. Now, you might need it to interpret that information, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get you what you're looking for. This is good. So Mary's talking about always comparing myself to others that I see online. That can spiral out of control because you wonder if you're doing versus what they are doing. Right? Perception is reality. And of course, we've heard many things of not comparing your insides to other people's outsides, realizing that everyone is projecting an image of themselves. They are curating an image of themselves on social media that may or may not be intentional. The other thing is to realize that those income producing activities, those things that are going to have the most effect on your business, probably do not take 8 hours. They might take 3 hours or 2 hours or 5 hours, depending on the day and depending on the tasks. So thinking about that, if someone is posting kind of that they're doing this all day productivity, it's probably inflated ever so slightly, right? We want to be intentional about what we're looking at and looking at our results. What are the things that we can be doing? And that's focused on process. We're going to talk about the difference between being process oriented versus results oriented here in a few. So moving on, we want to look at and think about something that is known as the 7 circles. So of course, there are many, many factors of life, many areas that we might have, but what we find is that consistently, there are probably about 7 or 8 areas or buckets of life in which we spend most of our time, most of our energy, most of our money. And so thinking about this, those 7 circles, and the reason why the names aren't here is so that you can fill them in, right? We're looking for participation. We want to be thinking about these things, but thinking about those 7 circles. So right at the top at that 12 o'clock, which should be most important, is going to be your spiritual self. Now, some of you might hear that and immediately kind of pull back. Don't confuse spiritual with religious. If you are religious, then wonderful. Those things might be in tandem with one another. If you are thinking about spiritual, the best way that I can describe it is that your spiritual self is the thing that you refill, right? So when I refill my cup, when I'm pouring into my cup to make sure that I am able to present and produce and be that person that I need to be for my spouse, for my partner, for my significant other, for my children, for my parents, for my clients, whatever that might look like, Your spiritual self is, how do I pour into my own cup, right? And so the idea here is that for each of these 7 circles, you want to identify a goal or goals that you can have around these areas. I talk about this all the time, that for me, if you had asked me 6 years ago, Michael, what is your spiritual goals for 2017? I would have laughed at you. I just wouldn't have had them. I would have told you, I probably would have gone on some very long rant about the fact that I was raised Catholic and I'm not particularly practicing, and that there are some life-altering things that maybe are that's not what this is about, right? And you can save that maybe for our one-on-ones. But the idea of having spiritual goals is, what do I do for myself to make sure that I'm pouring into my own cup? For some of you, that might look like morning routine. For some of you, that might look like scripture. For some of you, that might look like meditation or yoga or reading or scribing. There's a wonderful book. I'm going to be naming off a few books throughout this training that might be helpful for you. There's one book by Hal Elrod that's called The Miracle Morning. And essentially what Hal did is that he looked at a lot of different successful people, and we're going to call success both financial, emotional, spiritual aspects. And they looked at what were these people doing to start their day in a place in which they were pouring into their own cup. And what they realized is that these individuals had a lot of different versions, but there were some common denominators. Those common denominators became an acronym, which is known as life savers. So the savers, those 6 letters of savers, are what Hal found that if you had these things going on in your day, that there was a wonderful way for you to pour into your own cup, right? So the idea is the S, the first S of savers, there's 2 S's. First S of savers is silence. So this would look like silence or meditation, just taking a moment for yourself, and also realize that there is no time commitment or requirement for any of these savers. It could take 30 seconds. It could look like 3 minutes. It could look like 30 minutes, whatever you need for yourself. So silence meditation is just an opportunity to kind of feel your body, maybe feel where there are some aches and pains, maybe feel where there are some moments of just kind of checking in with yourself, with your breathing, with your mindset. For any of you, those squirrels, that shiny object syndrome, the chasing after things, that your brain immediately races. I know that for some of you, sitting in silence is going to be like closing your eyes and you're like, I need to take the dogs out. I wonder if the dogs have any more food. I know that there's some laundry in the dryer. I need to move the washer over before it starts smelling like mildew. That the idea of meditation turns into just this laundry list of things that you get up within 20 seconds. If that is you, then maybe I suggest that you go after guided meditations, right? Guided meditations that you can find on YouTube. There are tons of apps that you can use for this, but a guided meditation gives you a central point to focus on. That central point is the voice of the person who is kind of giving you that guided meditation, an opportunity to just explore and go with that, right? Release yourself, surrendering yourself to that meditation might look like that, right? So that would be number 1, that savor. That first one is silence or meditation. Number 2 is affirmations, right? So the affirmations, you do affirmations, you either do positive affirmations or negative affirmations, right? The I'm overweight, that would be a negative affirmation. I'm lazy, that would be a negative affirmation. I need to get my shit together. Well, that could possibly look like a positive or a negative, depending on what you're looking like, right? The other aspect of affirmations might look like, I am surrounded by gratitude and abundance. And that's actually something that I have really tried to use as my own affirmation. Maybe some people have 20 or 30 affirmations. I just have the one, right? I am surrounded by gratitude and abundance. And the reason that that is my affirmation is because my default is not always to be grateful and is not always to feel a level of abundance. I naturally, there's another book, Psychology of Money. I naturally have a scarcity mindset around money. Those of you that have been around me long enough know that I have this weird fear, although I haven't had it in a while, but I have this weird fear of being homeless. And that idea, even though, the acronym of fear is false evidence appearing real, I have no evidence to support that I would ever be homeless. I have no evidence to support that any of the people in my world would allow that to happen. Yet that is this fear. It comes from childhood, right? We can do the whole Freudian thing on another call. But the idea of looking at these things, so starting my day, which this used to start for me. We'd have incense. The house was larger and candles couldn't make the whole house smell. So I would light incense and I would light two sticks. One was gratitude and one was abundance. So the idea of after meditation or during meditation, I would light those two incense. I'm surrounded by gratitude and abundance, right? If that sounds too hippy dippy for you, do whatever you need to do. But the idea of I am surrounded by gratitude and abundance works for me, right? There was another one that I've heard many times, which is I'm alive, excited, and ready for the day, right? Or I'm alive, excited, and full of energy. The idea that maybe in the beginning of the day, you're not alive and excited and full of energy. You might be alive and that's about it. For those of you that are on here, do you have any affirmations? Maybe that could be helpful for some of the other members that are here. What are some affirmations that you enjoy? These could also be affirmations that you've had in the past, right? Maybe it's not something that you've been doing a lot of, but maybe it's something that you would like to be focused on or bringing back in. Tamisha said, I attract to me unlimited abundance. That's great. Mary, be the change you wish to see in the world. I love that. Amy, where's my Adderall? Where's my Adderall? Right? Looking, sure. There is that. Right. The idea here is just as we are starting our moments and starting our days around these things, it's understanding that the words that I'm telling myself, the stuff that I'm pouring in, it's the same thing with the news. I know that there are some things that are happening in the world that might cause you to want to be in and around the news. I know that in our house many, many years ago, we would have the TV on and, the cable news channel would be on 24/7, right? That ticker would just be rolling and they'd be regurgitating the same information hour after hour after hour with some pundit doing a variation on a theme. We realized that we couldn't necessarily do anything about that. It wasn't serving us. It was just pouring in this level of fear, pouring in this level of scarcity. And so we don't have, first of all, we don't have cable, but we don't have cable. We don't have the news on at all, right? I will read the news. We will read news sources that are unbiased or try to be as unbiased as possible, but really thinking about that, get the information and then move on. It's the same thing that we need to do with ourselves on how we're pouring into ourselves with good, positive information, right? So thinking about that, what are those affirmations that you're doing for yourself? Are you doing silence, meditation? Are you listening to your internal voice? We talk about this often in the sense of many of us immediately turn music on. We have music in the car. We go and we have conversations with people. We end the day of work and we go out and we socialize with people. We might do certain things like self-medication, whether that looks like weed or alcohol or whatever else you might be doing. And it's this kind of hurdle, just sprint from the moment that we wake up to the moment that we go to sleep. And very rarely do we take the time to sit with ourselves and listen to ourselves and have conversations with ourselves and get to know ourselves, our true selves. And so the idea of being able to start your day with even a small portion of that is being able to focus on and start to listen to yourself and get to a really good place. I mean, I talk about this. It's like, I enjoy who I am. And that has not always been the case. That took a lot of time, a lot of work. So I enjoy my company, which has not always been the case. And so in order to take me away from my company, my solitude, it's got to be good. Again, that's not always been the case for me. That's something that has been a part of my own journey. And so being able to make sure that you're starting with that silence and meditation, that you're starting with these affirmations. And I just want to preface that you don't have to do this in any particular order. It just had to be a particular order so that it could become a word, right? i.e. the savers. So silence meditation was number one. Affirmations was number two. The third is visualizations, right? So we want to visualize the goal already achieved. We want to visualize maybe it looks like, for some of you, it might look like a level of possession, right? I am closing my eyes. I'm seeing myself inside of my waterfront home. I'm looking at the boat that I have paid cash for. I have a wonderful family that is in bed behind me. I'm maybe in my backyard looking at my pool, looking at my boat. Right? Visualizing that could look like possessions. It could look materialistic things. It could look like I have a wonderful relationship with my spouse, partner, significant other. We have deep, intimate conversations. We trust one another explicitly, right? Like that implicitly, rather. That idea of it could also be about manifesting and working on what is that future that I want for myself. Do I see it clearly in that third eye? Do I see it with my visualizations of what I'm wanting for myself? Because in the absence of that, we again revert back to autopilot, or we revert back to, if I don't have a vision, then there's someone else's vision for me. We live in a world in which we are getting marketing pieces by the hundreds, if not the thousands now, every single day. They say that the average consumer spends 7.3 hours on their phone, right? So a US person, a US citizen, spends on average 7.3 hours on an internet connected device, i.e. their tablet, their laptop, their desktop, their cell phone. So thinking about that is, in the absence of you having clear goals for yourself, you having clear ideas of where you want to spend your money, what you want to do your time with, there are other people that are spending millions of dollars and that are sending impressions over and over and over again. If this sounds scary for you, just imagine for your kids, that over and over and over again, they are trying to sell you something, right? There's a wonderful quote that is that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And sure, that could be political, that could be emotional, that could be philosophical. That's also just simply saying, like, if you don't have an opinion on the food that you're going to eat, you might revert to the commercial that you watched or listened to. If you don't have an idea of the clothes that you want to wear, you might revert to what marketing companies are telling you to wear, right? And so there's aspects of this in terms of being really intentional on our lives. So we want to visualize what it is that we want for ourselves, for our relationships, for our family members, for our life, for our future. And we want to be visiting that often in the morning. The idea of having those visualizations also ensures that we are doing those activities that are in alignment with getting us there, right? Because in the absence of those larger goals, those short-term distractions look easy. That $200 dinner 4 days a week becomes $800, right? That's $3,200 a month. You know, I know that we did this pre-COVID, and we realized that we were spending an unbelievable amount of money on things that just didn't matter to us. And again, we're going to get into budgets and we're going to get into those things, but it's like, sure, spending $24, $30, $48, $50,000 on takeout sounds fine when that money is not to be allocated to something else, when it doesn't matter. But once you start saying, I would rather have taken 6,000 of that money and put that towards dining out, and take the remainder of that and put it into a retirement account, or buying an investment property, or paying off debt, or putting my kid through private school, whatever that might look like for you, the idea is, in the absence of that larger goal, that bigger thing, sure, buying an extra appetizer, that's $15. You know, you think about, you know, and one of this is the big thing. I know we've got quite a few people here that are in the Hillsborough County area. You know, Hillsborough County, fun fact, you might not know this. I actually learned this from someone who is a real estate agent who previously owned a bagel franchise. That's part of the reason why they moved to Hillsborough from New York, is that Hillsborough County was the first county in the United States in which the household ate more than half, so a little bit more than half of all of their meals out. In the entire country, Hillsborough County was the first county to do that. And so a lot of, you know, fast casual, a lot of franchises, they all started to build up in Hillsborough County specifically because of that. So if you think about how many meals, and this will be a good survey because I've heard enough of my voice for a couple of minutes, how many meals do you think that you eat out every week? Breakfast, you know, I'm grabbing Dunkin', Starbucks. Lunch, I'm going to run to Chipotle. I'm going to go to Naked Farmer. I'm going to, you know, do lunch with a client. That's justifiable. Dinner, we're going to go and just grab dinner. How many of you, what would you say is the number of times that you eat out? Okay, 3 to 4. Mary said 2 to 3. Regina lives in the middle of nowhere, so she says 1 time every 2 weeks. I'm just kidding. Naveen, 5 to 6 meals. Chelsea, too much. Mashonda, 4. Jason, 5 to 6. 2-ish, right? This is not again, this is not a place of judgment. I love to eat in restaurants and to dine in restaurants. I don't have control of portions. I don't have control of certain ingredients. I don't, right? And so there's a level of that also of wanting to be intentional about knowing what we eat. That journey of self-discovery and intentionality and consciousness around the food and things that we put in our body does force Doug and I to look at those things differently. In the absence of a larger goal, like my personal health, sure, you got a sample of something, absolutely, right? Like I will tackle anybody that's got a free sample at the mall. That would have been before, not necessarily now, right? Because of the idea that you have those larger goals for yourself, for your health, for your life. So visualizing what that looks like for you, what a healthy lifestyle looks like for you. There's a wonderful book. Here's another one. Maybe it should become a shot game, right? You have to take a shot every time I name a book. Please don't do that. We've got a long way to go. But the idea of this is there's another book that's called Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. She does a great job at the beginning of the book. See, this is why I miss doing live classes, because I can't see anybody laughing or dead face or whatnot. So even just an LOL in the chat box will make me feel good. The idea here is looking at the Susan Scott. She was talking about going to a retreat. And in the retreat, for many of them, they were sitting down and they all sat down, right? They kind of gathered to a meeting place. They all sat down. And the instructor, the facilitator, told them to go and leave for 2 hours. And when they came back, they wanted them to approach the same space, but from a place of being in the mindset as if they are a samurai. So an example for anybody that's on here that might not know what a samurai was. Samurai was a feudal warrior in historic Japan and antiquity Japan, in which essentially they were hired hitmen. They were hired soldiers. They were paid to do that. But thinking about a samurai, this is someone who walking through the woods would have constantly be thinking about being ambushed. They would be thinking about someone else potentially coming in and killing them, someone from another clan that was looking to take over a particular territory. So thinking about that in the chat box, go ahead and put for me, like if you were to reapproach in a wooded area, what different things would you do from being normal to thinking and impersonating a samurai? How would you walk? How would you breathe? How would you be moving through the trees? You know, go ahead and put that in the chat box for me, please. So be more visual, aware of my surroundings, right? So instead of just like, all right, I'm walking, right? Thinking about this of the difference between a child, even. You think of that childlike, just like frolic through the woods versus any of you who might be afraid of bears. You're like constantly on alert. You're looking everywhere. You're listening to every crack and creak and leaf falling and twig breaking, right? There's that level of alertness that is in your body. So just as Mary's saying, being more visual, taking everything and looking what's camouflage and what's not supposed to be there. All right, Regina says, like a ninja, light as a feather. Right, so making sure that my steps, I'm not just like walking through all of the leaves. I'm looking at my foot placement. Where is an area that I might be able to put my foot down that's going to make less noise so that I'm not alerting anyone? Right, Naveen said, walking slowly with every step, looking sideways and being aware of my surroundings. So there's an aspect of this, which is that is a form of visualization. I am starting to act and live through the visualization of being a samurai, right? Or being samurai. I guess we'd have to look at the pretense. But the idea here is to do the same thing of how do you think someone moves through life that maybe has those things that you are looking for in your world? There's this concept of be, do, have that many of you have heard of. And be, do, have is so often in Western society, we see what someone else has, right? And Mary kind of put this in the chat box earlier, like I'm comparing myself to what other people have, what other people have accomplished, what other people are doing. And so in that, I am so often going, I want what they have. And we do live in a society, which is the get rich quick, take a diet pill, or I guess it's Ozempic now. The different things people do, like, oh, just tell me what to do and I will do it so that I can have the thing that they have. But in so many cases, we often find that people want to have what they have, but they don't want to do what they do, or they don't want to become what it takes to have those results. You think about an all-star athlete. Oh man, I wish I had their money. I wish I had their titles. I wish I played as good as they do. But are you willing to do the activities that are necessary in order to have what they have? Are you willing to have a daily routine that has that? Are you becoming the person who prioritizes your fitness and your health and your practice, maybe over your relationship with your family, maybe over your relationship with your children? Right? Are you willing to do the things and become the person in order to have those results? The same thing here with visualization is, if I want to have a net worth of $100 million, where would my day look different than my day looks now? Where would my interactions look different than the way that it looks now? Where would my spending habits look different than the way that it is now? What investment tools would I be using that I'm not using now? If I wanted to be a better mom than what I am currently, or if I wanted to be the best mom, is there something that I think that the best mom would be doing that I'm not doing? Would the best mom be responding to things differently than the way that I'm doing? Right? I mean, so this is applicable. If your relationship with your spouse, partner, significant other isn't necessarily the best place that it is, who do I have to become so that I can have that relationship in which my spouse wants to be loyal with me, that wants to confide in me, who wants to be with me, right? That idea that you have to be before you can do and you have to do before you can have. Absolutely. Thank you, Mary, for breaking that down. And that is very much what we're talking about here. So often at that mid-year, we go, oh man, I wish that I had different results. Stop fixating on the results. So much of our society is results oriented. Let's focus on being process oriented, process obsessed. Does my morning routine reflect the results that I'm looking for? Does my productivity reflect the results I'm looking for? Are my actions throughout the day, are the people that I'm chatting with in correlation, right? I have a coaching client of mine. We were having a conversation about conversion rates. He's making the contacts, he's hitting the goals, he's going on the appointments, he's not converting, or he's converting, but they're not selling. And we had a great conversation about this, in which we're talking about condos. Condos in Florida, many of you know, not all, but in certain instances, they're not moving, whether it has to do with the milestone assessments or it has to do with different things that are going on in the market. And so if this person builds their business on cold calling, would it be better for them to spend their time cold calling condos, or would it be better for them to be cold calling 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single family homes under 500,000? That's a live question. Which one do you think in the chat box? Single family. Thank you, Mashana. Right. So now I would say that the busyness, even though it could look like productivity, is that he's calling 100 people a day, but maybe 35 of those numbers are condos. It would be better for him to prioritize calling 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single family homes sub 500, maybe the first hour of his list or the first 45 minutes of his list, and then he can move on to tier 2, right? That is the level of going from just, I'm doing the activity, I'm going through the motions, to being intentional with my activity. We honestly could just save the 35 calls that he made to condos and probably give that back to him to go spend time with his family, right? So the idea here is, I want us to be conscious, right? And conscious is a level of awareness, bringing awareness into all of his activities, just like the samurai who has that awareness of every footprint that they put down, the way that they move, the way that they carry themselves, the way that they're breathing. That sounds tiring to most people. That sounds exhausting to have to be on that much. However, if you are looking for results that you're not currently having, that is an area where you can improve instantaneously, and it doesn't cost you any money. It costs you $0 to be more intentional. Now, sure, we might talk about different tools and tactics that you're going to use to get the results that you're looking for, but the idea of being intentional with your time is, just as we were talking about, that no one is necessarily disciplined, they have just mastered self-control. It's the same thing with this. If I can spend 80% of my time being intentional, or 60% of my time being intentional, that might look like light years of growth comparatively to where I currently am. And there are moments when I'm going to be completely on, and there might be moments when I am all the way off, right? So using this as an assessment. So again, going through those savers, we have that silence and affirmation. We have our silence and meditation. We have our affirmations. We have our visualizations, where we're visualizing that future for ourselves and we're pulling that future into the present because of our activities. Exercise. Exercise could look like sun salutations. For those of you that do yoga, this is just kind of getting the body moving, right? This is upward, downward dog. This might look like cobra. This might look like the Sufi grind, right? There's some different things that you can be doing movement-wise. It's low impact. It doesn't require you to have to like stand on your head, but you're able to do things to get the blood flowing, your body feeling good, your back feeling good, right? There is the saying that is, you are as old as your back. This is part of the reason why if you look at a lot of corporate buildings in Japan, they have everybody get up and they all do kind of exercises with one another, right? At different times throughout the day. As an entire group, they will do this. And part of that is to just get the body to stretch, to get the back to stretch. You are as young as your back. You know, your mobility has everything to do with your back. So taking care of your back is part of the reason for exercise. So it could look like walking. Maybe it looks like a long walk with your dog. It could look like yoga. It could look like stretches, or it could look like going to the gym and doing a full-on workout. Whatever that looks like for you, but the idea is that you're putting some form of exercise into your day that isn't, I'm waking up, I'm brushing my teeth, I'm grabbing coffee, I'm getting the kids ready, I'm taking the dogs out, I'm bringing the dogs back in, we're getting in the car, we're taking them to where we need to take them, then I get to work and I sit in this chair for 8 hours, and then I leave this chair and then I go back and then I sit on the couch after dinner and the kids are asleep. There was no form of that was putting my body, and I know that this was a big realization for me, is still a challenge for me. Again, being completely transparent, I have had many challenges with my weight and with my body and body dysmorphia and all of those things. And realizing also that at a certain point, I had to come to the realization that my body was the accumulation of subconscious choices, or my body was the accumulation of the lack of intention. So when I'm not intentional about exercise, when I'm not intentional about what I eat, when I'm not intentional about portion sizes, when I'm not intentional about what I drink, and then my body is excessively overweight, I can't also be upset because I don't have anything to be proud of because I've not done anything intentional. And that might be deep for some of you, and that might not necessarily be the way that you are. And this is definitely not about not being body positive. I think that you should love your body. I should love my body. And if there are moments where I don't love my body, then I need to be intentional about changing that. Otherwise, it's just complaining, just a form of escapism, right? So thinking about that for me is making sure that some form of exercise, some form of intentionality around diet is a part of my life, right? For you, that's a choice for you to make. So exercise, and then the last one is scribing. Oh, I'm sorry, two more. R is for reading, right? So we have silence. Can someone do me a favor in the chat box? Just write this down. So we have the S is silence, the A is affirmation, the V is visualization, the E is exercise. I'm going to give you the last two, but then we're going to do a deep dive. The R is reading, and then the last S is scribing. So reading, if you think about a self-help book, or you think about a financial book, or you're thinking about some of those things, typically a nonfiction book is roughly about 180,000 words. It equates to about 220 pages. If you think about 220 pages, you know, or 300 pages, somewhere between 220 and 300 pages, if you read 10 pages a day, you will finish a book each month. So the idea is, what would your world look like if in a year's time you finished 10 books or 12 books that were focused on mindset, or we're focused on financial literacy, or we're focused on building wealth or building businesses, right? You can be very intentional with your time. Now, at the same aspect of this, it's not about doing the activity, right? It's not just about putting the time on it, the busyness. Oh, I want to tell people that I read 36 books. I did that. I think that that was the year that Mashanda and I were in the same office. I feel like I had this like goal of reading 3 books a month. I cannot tell you what 26 of those books were about. Good to great. I have a feeling it has something to do with getting from good to great. But I was going through the motions. Again, busyness, right? So that I could tell everybody that I read 36 books, but was I really digesting? Was I taking the nutrients out of each one of those books? The answer is absolutely no. So do not get fixated on the idea of like, I must read 10 pages a day so that I can check the box, so that I can say that I read a book, so that I feel good about myself. But the idea of being intentional, of reading something. No one in my family was talking about money. No one, especially not about building wealth. I attribute a lot of my mindset in a lot of ways to my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. She's the matriarch of our family. Absolutely adore her. For my grandmother, it was very much about saving. So it was never about investing. It was never about building wealth. It was about saving. It was about paying your bills. It was about living within your means. It was about paying your future self. And then whatever was left over was play money. I mean, she was definitely about that, but that wasn't about building wealth. So realizing if those conversations weren't around you, go and find them is part of this. Oh, maybe I'm not really great. I don't know anything about stocks. Let that I don't know anything about stocks be the level of awareness of I would like to learn about stocks. And so I'm going to build a plan in my day-to-day so that I can start to familiarize myself with that language. I can start to learn those things. And for those of you that are like, I don't read, that's okay. So thinking about that on another Zoom, am I not important enough to you, Amy? Thinking about that in terms of, our day-to-day of being intentional, it's now I can bring those things into focus. I can bring those things into those activities that I need to be doing, right? So that would be reading. Those of you that are like, I'm not really a reader. Reading also can look like Audible. So listening to books, if you are that, I'm a visual learner, so I can't necessarily just listen to it. I need to visually see it. But again, know thyself. It might look like podcasts. It might look like YouTube videos. It might look like video podcasts, whatever that is for you. But the idea is you're going to seek out those informations and you're going to look at those things. And then last is scribing or journaling, right? Now, this is not Dear Diary. Shantae was mean to me today. Although sometimes that's true. I'm just kidding. She's never. But the idea of using this as what am I intentional about? What am I thinking about? What am I putting my energy towards? What do I want to maybe sit on and think with and really develop a plan around? Maybe what are some of those things that I am needing to be intentional or that I want to plan future conversations around? That idea of doing that. So the concept here, this quite frankly could be peppered throughout your entire day. But even think about how different your morning would be if you did silence, meditation, affirmations, visualizations, exercise, reading, and scribing all within the first 2 hours of your day. You're like, holy crap, I accomplished more than what most people do. The idea here is that silence meditation might look like a 5-minute guided meditation. Affirmations might be 20 seconds of repeating an affirmation 10 times to yourself. Visualization might look like 30 seconds. Exercise could look like 5 minutes of stretching. It could look like an hour at the gym. Reading 10 pages, listening to a YouTube short video, 5 minutes, whatever. Time does not actually need to be a significant amount of time dedicated to these things, right? And for any of you that are like, I love my romantic novels, or I love my fiction, or that could be in the evening. The idea that you are seeking information for personal growth in the morning is this idea of using that to pour into your cup, right? So I'm not going to do this for all 7, but just to give you an idea, that concept of doing a morning routine or thinking about setting goals around your spiritual self, a reading of that could look like the Bible. It could look like different things for you. Maybe you have the upper room, or you have a daily devotional or something that can be incorporated into your morning, right? If you do want that spiritual and religious aspect to be intermingled with one another, absolutely go forth and find it. But the idea is that I have intentional, conscious choices that I'm making around my spiritual self, around my physical health, around my personal growth, which you realize that those 3 circles, a lot of that can actually be remedied by that morning routine we just went through, right? We want to look then. So all of those 3, those first 3 of the 7 is you, maybe your relationship with God, your personal relationship, right? Then the 4th circle of the 7 circles would be your family and key relationships. So what am I doing to be intentional and setting goals around my time with my spouse, partner, significant other, with my children? And I work with many people. I work with many moms, of which one is to be intentional and be 100% present when I see my daughter when she comes home from school. For that first hour when her daughter comes home from school, she is intentionally working on being present, having a conversation with her daughter, making eye contact with her daughter, because she realized that she was in the computer. She was doing some of the other things. So number one, absolutely, Mary. One is spiritual. Two is physical. Three is, this would be personal growth / potential, right? So what am I doing to grow as an individual? Number four is that family key relationships. Five is your job / career. And we're going to talk about those two being a little bit different, right? So the job is the hat that you wear at that moment. The career is the big picture that you have for yourself and for your business and for that purpose of business, making sure that your activities are in alignment there. And then 6 would be finance. So what are the goals that you have for yourself around finance? That could look like business finance and personal finance. And in case anybody hasn't caught on, the reason why this is called the mid-year alignment and not just the mid-year business planning workshop is because you can't just fix the business part and not focus on some of this other stuff. I was definitely someone that thought that I could fix my problems financially. I could pay them away, right? Oh, I could hire the cleaning person. I could hire out for the clothes to be dry cleaned. I could hire for this, that, and the other. That would somehow make all of those other things go away, and it doesn't. So the idea here is that when you focus on yourself and making sure that you are good, and then making sure that your home life is good, because I don't know about you, but I don't think that you can really be 100% present in your business if you're worried about your children. If you had a huge argument with your spouse, partner, significant other the night before, and you are, going back and forth via text throughout the day, there's no way. There's no way for you to be able to focus on the business if you're fixated on how you're going to pay your bills, right? And now I know that that's situational, but the idea of if I'm creating an environment in which I do not budget and then I'm self-sabotaging by putting myself in situations in which I am stretched thin, that is affecting my mindset. That is affecting the way that I'm able to show up to my business. So this can't just be a business workshop without us focusing on some of those other areas, right? So we want to set intentional goals around these areas. And then the last one is recreation, right? So spiritual, physical, personal growth potential, family, key relationships. 5th is job / career. 6th is finance. And the 7th, thank you, Shantae, and the 7th is recreation. Recreation being, am I enjoying enough of the fruits of my labor, or the fruits of my labor spoiling because I'm so focused on my labor? Again, kind of going back to that idea that there's plenty of people in which, business or real estate or whatever industry you're in becomes their personality. They can't talk about anything else. Eating dinner with their family is looking at the top of their head because they're constantly responding to clients. Their identity is wrapped up in being important and needed by their clients, sometimes at the deficit of their family. So the idea is looking at that recreation as, am I enjoying the fruits of my labor? Or am I just laboring? Or am I not producing any fruit, right? Let's get some ahas from this section before we move on. What action items around this would you like to do? What awareness do you have? Have you moved too far away from setting intentions around some of these areas, being fixated on trying to get the business up and running? I'd love to hear from a few of you now before we move on. So Mary said, more aware of self-control. So just bringing that awareness into those day-to-day activities. Be intentional with your time, but don't punish yourself if you don't. Absolutely. You are flexing a muscle. Maybe in some cases, you're flexing a muscle that hasn't been used in a while. So the concept here is to be able to work on getting a little bit better. Many of you are, as business owners, solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, you are in a situation in which you have to react to your clients' needs. You have to react to things that happen situationally. But I find that if more and more of our day feels like we are being reactive instead of proactive, that is absolutely when we feel like we are being punched and beat up as opposed to throwing the punches. It feels like we are not in control of our life, but we are just kind of being taken out by the riptide. Animosity and resentment starts to form because of that. And that's really something that we want to move away from. So the concept is we know that there's a natural form of reaction to clients, situation, things that are going to go on. Yet I want to make sure that I'm still actively working towards putting intentional things throughout my day. Shantae said, need to be better, or need to do better rather, at balancing the spiritual, physical recreation with the career financial stuff. Absolutely. You know, I know for me personally, I'm very, very proud of Shantae and the business that she's built for herself and the opportunities that she has created for herself and others through the business of herself. And, you know, seeing that comment, I absolutely know that there are those moments of where it might feel like the business is kind of overtaking. I would also say kudos to you for being intentional about being able to do family cruise with your mom and with your family earlier this year, being able to go and celebrate birthday parties with people, to be able to go away for the weekend. You are doing better, you know. Regina, I'd like to spend more attention to my spiritual self and my personal growth. If that isn't solid, I don't think I can pay attention to the other 5, and that's very true. At the same time, we don't want to. It is about balance, counterbalance, whatever we're going to identify it as. The concept here is one is going to make sure that you feel good. The other one is going to fund those other areas. And so getting intentional, again, being very frank and clear with ourselves about what is distraction. What are we calling some of those things that are getting in the way, right? Few other people that are on here, I appreciate you being here, would love to be able to hear from you. So please stop doing dishes or whatever you're doing and join us. Comment, engage, would love for that to be the case. And we're moving on. All right, so we got to take inventory. Some of you have been able to do this. We are not going to take inventory together. This is a part of that mid-year alignment workbook that Shantae has put together for you. Again, Shantae, if you could do me a favor and just throw that link in the comment section or chat box again, just so that if anybody has joined us late, they're able to download that and have access. Taking inventory is we have to know where we are and we have to know where we're going so that we know how to bridge the gap between those two. Right? So taking inventory is to look at the first half of the year and going, all right, what are the total number of units that I have sold so far in Q1 and Q2? What's been the gross revenue? In most cases, those first 2 areas are really easy. You know how many things that you've sold and you know how much money you've made gross. When it gets a little bit more complicated is when we start getting into the expenses. Especially if you only do expenses around tax time and you're like, oh, I'm so exhausted. I just did the expenses for 2023 because taxes were due in April. Take this time. If you've not done it, again, this is not a place to shame yourself, right? We're not going to beat ourselves up. But the idea is that this is a level of awareness. After this meeting, after this workshop, it is you taking this information. Do the work for yourself, right? Do not use someone else's example that's here as enough for you. You've got to go through this process for yourself. If at any moment these numbers are confusing or you don't know how to reach them or whatnot, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help you go through some of the stuff. But the idea here is you've got to understand, it's going to be on the next slide, but I'm going to tell you anyway, you cannot have accountability without accounting. It's not possible. We don't have anything to track. We don't know where we've come from. We don't know where we're going. We don't know the growth that's happening. We don't know where to make some of those adjustments. So we look at our gross revenue, we look at our expenses, we see what our net income is, right? Now you might look at this idea of what's the total invested. So that's personal investment. How much have you invested within the first half of the year? How much have you saved within the first half of the year? And what are you proud of? And so this one we can do all together. So go ahead, and I would love to be able to hear from you. So taking a moment of reflection, maybe for the first hour and 15 minutes that we've been doing this, you might be going like, man, I feel behind, or I feel a little bit beat up. I would really love for you to take a moment and just celebrate some of those wins that you have had in the first half of the year. So please go ahead and put that in the comment sections. We want to be able to celebrate with you. What are you proud of from Q1 and Q2? First half of the year, what are some things that you've been able to do that you are proud of? While you're typing, I will go ahead and share for myself. Um, my business is a unique one. As a coach, my business is built on the successes of the people that I coach. Now, with that being said, it's also in one of the ways of I share often that I love being a business partner without sharing in the profits. So in order for my business to grow revenue wise, it actually isn't built on my clients making more money. Actually, it's by my clients making more money, other people ask the questions of what are they doing to be successful. Thankfully, many of them are advocates for my business as well. And so they usually do word of mouth. They send referrals my way. People join our coaching community. That coaching community getting larger ends up meaning that my business grows. Usually it's because of the successes of the people that I work with. So I'm very, very proud of their wins because their wins are truly my wins. With that being said, my business is up this year, which is great. A big bucket list for anybody that has been going through these classes with me for a while. You might know that in May, I was able to take my husband and my father-in-law and mother-in-law. They just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. They celebrated their 70th birthday and 75th birthday. And we were able to take them on an all expense paid trip to Alaska. That's something that's been on our bucket list. It has been on my business plan for the last few years of being able to do that financially. And that has been a wonderful thing to be able to do, right? To see those things come to fruition. When we talk about that a life by design is to be able to give to the people, to have those experiences with the people that are in our world. That is one of those that has been a really fulfilling aspect of this business. And so being able to do that in the first half of this year, all the while moving and buying a house and doing some other things that we've been doing, big life changes, that has been one that I'm very, very proud of, because if you've been around, you've heard me talk about Alaska probably for the last 2 or 3 years, right? Let's see. So Regina said, I have a pipeline. Yes, she does. 95% because of the work I've done with Michael. I'm building a foundation and I'm proud of that. Very proud of Regina and what she's doing to build her business in her community. Absolutely. Shantae said her clients' businesses are growing. Yes, they are. And so is hers. She is 85%. Talk to me, 85% near goal. What does that mean? You're 85% of goal, or 85% of your clients are near their goals? Help me know a little bit more about that one, Shantae. Mary said, learning more about the new construction buying process, opening myself up to doing more open houses, and met a lot of my buyers that way. Dialing and not being afraid, educating myself daily so I can best serve my clients. Finally bought a boat. That's one of those bucket lists, right? The purpose of business that she's been saving for a couple of years. And it would have been a lot harder without my help. So thank you for that, Mary. I appreciate that. 85% near the goals that I set for myself at the top of the year. Wonderful. Love that, Shantae, being on track. And we are seeing a lot of people, right? The idea of being intentional with those things, looking at that last one as well as what life by design items came to fruition in Q1, Q2. So when you're filling this out on your own, examples of that would be like Mary buying the boat that she's been saving for. An example of that would be like my family trip to Alaska that we've been saving for and planning for a while. Maybe it looks like you maxing out a 401k or a Roth IRA, or being able to take your kid somewhere or do something, right? The experiences worth giving, those lives worth leading, that's absolutely the aspect that we want to be able to put in here. Also, we want to make sure that you are able to look at the sources of your business. So taking some time and looking at the sources of your business is to understand where your business is coming from. Now, I know that that sounds redundant, but the idea here is that we want to know where your business comes from. Does it come from your sphere of influence? Is it coming from past clients? Is it coming from online leads, open houses? Is it coming from Google Ads, Zillow.com? Is it coming from conferences? Is it coming from word of mouth? Really being intentional and sourcing every single piece of business. Asking your people, if you are not 100% sure, asking your people, where did they come from? How did they hear about you? Survey them often. The reason for this is so that we can make sure that we're allocating the funds in the areas that we need to be. It's to make sure that we're doubling down and that we are investing appropriately. I was just looking at some numbers with a client of mine yesterday. We looked at the three main sources of their business, right? The first source of their business was coming from their sphere and past clients. Their second source of their business was coming from their farm area, so a geographic farm area where they've been focusing on. The third aspect of their business was coming from the work that they were doing through open houses. We were able to see that $64,580 came from their sphere, $64,580 came from their farm, and $25,832 came from their open house. Now, you could get a little bit more. You'd be like, well, how was it so exact that those first two areas were the same? We could have sourced the income that came from each of those transactions and done it that way. That probably would have been the more accurate way of doing it. But because we were moving quickly yesterday, we wanted to look at it based on the average, right? So out of all of the transactions that have happened, divide that by the total number that has been for each of those transactions. And then we took that number, right, that average commission, and then we times that by the number of units in each of those areas. And so what we found is for the farm, right, that geographic farm area, those of you that are real estate agents that I coach your business, we oftentimes talk about geographic farming. So for him, for the first half of the year, 64,500 came from his farm. When we looked at how much was being spent on door hangers, postcards, activities within the farm, he spent $12,910. So we're able to see that that $12,000 investment yielded a $64,500 return. That is an 8x return on his investment. That's exactly what we're looking to do. So again, going back to, we can't have accountability without accounting. It's, I can't know whether or not we're getting a reasonable return on investment if we can't track it. In the same way, we're able to look at for his sphere. His sphere, he actually was spending a little bit less than what he was spending on farm, and that's natural. These people already know you, like you, trust you. You might not necessarily have to spend quite as much for client acquisition. You might be spending a little bit more on client retention. But what we also realized is that with that, there was maybe a little bit more of a buffer of what could be spent. Again, also looking at budget-wise, he was spending roughly about 7.3% on client acquisition, in which the model for his business would yield roughly about 10% for client acquisition. Now, if I gave all those numbers and I've confused you at all, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to explain that on a deeper level. But the idea here is basically by looking at what he's spent, by looking at what he's brought in, we're able to see how much of that, and actually with looking at the numbers, we realize that he had probably about an extra 3% that he could be spending, reinvesting into that client acquisition. Now, does he have to spend that money? No. I mean, if he could save money, then we want him to save money. But we also are able to keep an eye on that, that if for whatever reason, if any of those areas start to dip in his business, we know where we can infuse some additional funds to try to bring that number up, right? So the idea of looking at this business, the idea of looking at your numbers is so that this isn't just an autopilot, you know, I don't know where all my business is coming from. I don't know where I'm spending my money. I have to spend money to make money, right? People in Vegas say that. The people who play the lottery say that. I'm not a big fan of just spending money for the sake of spending it. We want to spend money intentionally by having a clear understanding of what is a reasonable return on investment we want in that area. We have a goal around that. We continue to work on that monthly. We look back at the numbers. We have a clear understanding about where the correlation is from my activity to my results, and we're able to make those micro adjustments. You don't have to do that alone. You know, this is not necessarily a whole pitch about getting into coaching with me, although you should. I would love to be able to work with you. But the idea here is really understanding more than anything, you have to have that level of accountability for growth and to be able to put that into play, you know, and us taking the time to look at his numbers and to see what it's telling us. He would tell you that he would not have taken the time to sit down and do those numbers if we weren't forcing that conversation through a coaching relationship. Right. And so maybe the feeling was, oh man, I'm spending a lot of money right now. But yet when we actually looked at it comparatively to the model, he's not spending enough, which made him feel a little bit better when we were able to look at also that investment, getting that 8x return. So the idea of sourcing our business, we want to know where our business is coming from. Typically, you will find that there are three main pillars that your business comes from. And the idea here is to think about a chair. You know, if I had a chair that only had one leg, then I would have to use my legs in order to keep it up, because if not, it would just fall over, right? So the idea is I'm doing it, but I am also falsely looking like it's stable. It looks like it's stable, but that's because I am helping it because I'm infusing the power and the stability of my legs, right? If a chair had two legs, I would still need at least one of my personal legs on the ground. Otherwise, that chair or that stool is just going to fall over. It's not stable enough to stand on its own with just two legs or one leg. So the idea that we really want a business that has a minimum of three sources of business. They're not necessarily going to be equal in value. There's usually a fairly noticeable diminishing return between 1, 2, and 3, or at least between 2 and 3. And then you might have 4, 5, 6, 7. You might have 8 or 9 different sources of business, but you will find a pretty significant diminishing return from your first and second sources versus 3 through 8. So thinking about this and getting just a little bit of engagement from those of you that are on here, talk to me about what have been your top 3 main sources of business. Go ahead and put that in the chat box for me, please. And that's okay. So, Naveen, I appreciate that level of transparency. So I feel like I'm in the bottom floor to getting to these steps. If anybody is just getting started, or you're restarting, or you're basically, throwing everything away and starting fresh, I almost encourage that more so than anything. I would love for all of us to maintain a startup mentality. I think having that startup underdog mentality makes us be scrappy and resourceful, and we look for ways to save money. We also look for ways to be exponentially more productive. And so I really want to encourage you to keep that as much as you can. Mashana said past clients, Sphere, and open houses. Open houses, Sphere, and referrals from Chelsea. Agent referrals, client referrals, and community involvement from Stephen. Yes, it is. Very proud of Stephen. His business is up 37% so far year over year for this year over last year. And he's had a lot of really great things. What did we just say? That 7 deals that you had so far this year has come from your efforts around agent referrals, I think it was. And so that's one of those. If you are an agent on here and you are a part of a big box brokerage, meaning Compass, Remax, Keller Williams, any of those, and you're not building some form of relationship with an agent to agent referral across the country, you're missing out on money. If I am a Coldwell Banker agent in Boise, Idaho, I am not necessarily going to be searching for a mom and pop in St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm probably going to start looking at a Coldwell Banker office because I'm thinking Coldwell, right? So the idea of you're a part of something that has more than a branch and you're not using agent referrals, that is something to talk about in terms of building your business a little bit more. That's a different story for a different day, but just as an aside. Referrals, past clients, referrals. Stephen did clarify that, yes, 7 of his deals came from agent referrals. So the idea here is by knowing where I'm putting my activities, so where my sources of business come from, we also need to be able to look at expenses, right? So when someone says to me, oh, I spent $6,000 on postcards, I want to know how much of the $6,000 of those postcards went to your farm, how much of that went to open houses, how much of that went to your Sphere or past clients. Because the idea here is if I had 4 pieces of business come from my Sphere, I want to know how much of my expenses, what fraction of my expenses could be contributed to the Sphere, right? So if I've had, let's say, 5 transactions from my Sphere, each one of those averaged roughly 10,000 of income, that would be $50,000 of income. If I looked at how much I've spent over the last 6 months on postcards to my Sphere, maybe I've spent $500 a month to send to my Sphere. So 5 times those 6 months is $3,000. I spent $3,000 on postcards. Maybe I did an event. Maybe the total cost that I put into my Sphere was $5,000 and I've made $50,000 worth of income. Then I could see that there's been a 10x return from the money that I've invested on staying visible in front of my Sphere and the closings that have happened. I can see where that correlation is. Now, if someone wants to split hairs and be like, well, Michael, you had closings in January, so technically you need to factor in how much you spent on expenses in November and December, which yielded to your January closing. We can go as deep and as thorough of an audit as you want. But the idea is that we can't have accountability without accounting. I will do whatever you want to do. I'll go to the end of the earth with you as long as you are going to look at the numbers and we can tell a story with those numbers, right? But for someone who's like, I don't know, I just spend money and I hope for a return. That's also an opportunity for us to be able to look at where do we have maybe some areas where we can cut back. Maybe there are some areas where you were sending postcards every single month and you could do every other month. Or maybe you can infuse it with something different. Or maybe you can add a digital component, which is going to keep the cost maybe a little bit cheaper, but still present. Again, we can't make different plays or call different plays if we're not looking at the overall field in our position in the field, right? So being very intentional about our sources of our income, our sources of business, and where are our expenses in correlation. So going back and looking at that sheet that is in your spreadsheet, being able to be intentional around that, right? So we need to talk for a moment about the path of money. So money can only go in 4 places. And this is called SIDS, so SIDS. And the way that it breaks down is that we can spend, we can invest, we can donate or tithe, and we can save. Those are the only 4 areas where money can go. And so for anybody who's on here that's going to hear me talk about that you need a budget, and you hear the word budget and it feels restrictive, or you hear the word budget and it just kind of causes you to like glaze your eyes over, all I'm asking you to do is to take inventory on where did you spend, where did you save, where did you invest, and where did you donate. In most cases, I shouldn't say most, but in many cases, 100% goes into the spend column. You're not saving anything, you're not donating anything, you're not investing anything. So now is where we talk about being intentional. You practice, when we talk about also that like stretching of a muscle, you practice spending, everybody does, every American does, spends multiple times a day, right? You swipe a credit card, you tap a credit card, you got auto payment, you got different things, you got things set up on subscriptions. We practice spending by the dozens, if not the hundreds of times per month. Our ability to flex the muscle of practicing investing might look like 1 time a month, 2 times a month, or every time you get a commission check or money is deposited, maybe you take a portion of that and you put it into an investment account. Same thing with donating. Maybe donating looks intentional or unintentional. Maybe you're set up on paying ASPCA $100 a month and that automatically gets deducted, but that's something that goes out every single month. Or with savings, maybe there's a pre-allocation that you have that you're doing. If you pay yourself a W-2 and so money already goes out, or if you are an independent contractor or someone who is commission-based, then the idea is that you would be taking a chunk of everything. So 1 is just a level of awareness, right? It's not shaming. It's not, oh man, I should be saving more. I should be donating more. I should be investing more. Sure, let the word should be that moment of awareness and then set intentions moving forward. The idea here is what I like to do, especially for those of you that are commissioned based or you get paid by invoices, is to take each invoice and already pre-slice it. I talk about this, especially any of you that are givers or you are someone who does for others more than you do for yourself. So often, you bake a pie and then you serve the pie, and then whatever's left over, that little scrap or that destroyed piece of pie or the crumbs is yours. And if that is you, then what I really encourage you to do is this concept of pre-slicing the pie before you give out your slices. So you take a little slice for yourself and you put it over, and then you take that remainder of the pie and then you serve the table. You're the one who did all the work. You're the one who did the activities. There's no reason why you should only get the crumbs of your hard work and effort. And so the idea here is that with every commission check that comes in, pre-allocating a certain amount of money that's going to go towards donations, how much money is going to go towards an investment, how much money is going to go towards saving, and how much you have to spend. I know that this is very easy to say when we're talking about having a surplus of money. If you've been waiting for a check for a while and then that check comes in, and so you've got this kind of backlog of bills and things, it can be difficult to have this mindset. And that's part of the reason why we have to get into a level of production. We have to be very intentional with our time. We have to make sure that we're not filling our days with busyness, but we're filling it with the income producing activities, that business effort. Then we can be intentional about some of the things that we're talking about here. Another book It's called Profit First by Mike Michalowicz, is essentially taking this concept and saying that you need a budget, right? You can't have accountability without accounting. And so historically, when we think about the way the businesses have been run, it looks like the left side. The left side says, I take my income minus expenses, and whatever's left over is the profit. Again, I make the pie, I serve the pie, whatever's left over is what I eat. Mike Michalowicz in the book says that you lead with profit. And so we determine what is the profitability that we want on our deals or what we want on that check. And then we take that number from the income, and whatever is left over is then what we can spend on those expenses. So we make the expenses fit in to the equation as opposed to our profit being the leftover. So we get creative and we look at different ways of doing that. Now you might go, well, Michael, I want 100% profit. Well, you're not going to really have that much of a sustainable business. The idea, though, is if I want a 35% profit margin or a 40% profit margin, then realizing that I'm going to take that number from my income, and then that 60% that's left over is where my expenses get to fit in. That's where I get to pay salaries. It's where I get to pay advertising. It's where I get to put some of that money away, right? So the idea here is to do this at home. It's to do this for your business. What I really love about this book is he talks about opening up multiple bank accounts. We have probably, I think the last time I looked, we have about 32 bank accounts. And our banker at Chase loves us for that. And at the same time, the idea is that I have a tax account. So for each business, we have a tax account. We have an income account. The income account has no debit card attached to it. It has no checks attached to it. So money goes into the income account. That is the whole pie, and then it gets sliced up. We have a tax account. We have a commissions account. We have an operating expense account. We have an owner's compensation account, and then we have an owner's profit account. And so the reason for that, again, and we can do some different variations for each one of you, the idea is that if I am doing the job of running the business, which eventually I will replace by hiring someone on a salary to run that business as a CEO or whatnot, then that is where that owner compensation for doing the job of a CEO is happening. And so that if I do hire someone, it doesn't immediately take a blow to my profitability. On a profitability standpoint, maybe profit looks like in your business, you want to do profit sharing for the members of your team, right? Maybe it is an employee-owned business, or you want to incentivize the other people that are on the sales team with you, and you want to share in those profits. That does not mean that you are sharing in the profits of the overall business. It is you are sharing in the profits of what has been pre-allocated in that profit account. So maybe it looks like out of every commission check that comes in, 10% goes into that owner profit account. Maybe that's the margin that we're looking for. And then of that 10% of that profit account is then where you have maybe predetermined profit share with the members of your team. If it is just you, then again, you still want to go through this of the idea that there's a certain amount that you automatically put away for taxes on every single one of those commission checks. There's an amount that you put away towards your operating expense account. There's an amount that you put away for yourself. And that way you're not spending that money, and you can look at it within a second and you can see how much is for taxes, how much is in your operating expense account. So you're like, oh, I'd like to do a client event. Well, go look at your operating expense account. The money's either in there or it isn't. And I give a couple different examples of this. It's the same thing for your household. Maybe most people have a checking account and a savings account. The idea is that for your personal, you would have a checking account, you would have an investment account, you would maybe have a general savings account, and then you would have your fun, play, vacation, recreation account, right? And the great thing about this is through online banking, you can nickname accounts, right? So for Mary, who previously was saving money for a boat, maybe we name that bank account Boat. Or we name that bank account investment account, or rental property, or Paris, whatever it might be. And that way you can also get really excited about watching that account grow, because you're seeing a direct correlation to the money that you're saving for that boat, for that trip, for that investment property. You're watching it grow, and you're getting that kind of excited win feeling of watching that thing grow over time. The idea here is we have to gamify the stuff that we can. We have to be intentional in the areas that we can. And we can't just assume that, oh, we're going to go and put money there. Or I know that this is very much the case with taxes. Oh, I didn't save anything. I needed to use the money now. But like on the next check, I'll just put double in the tax account. No, you won't. because the same thing that came up on this one is something else is going to come up on the next one. Life happens. So we can't make goals and have this utopia that is not factoring in some of those things around our world, right? Mary said, definitely want to make a goal of getting better of allocating funds and income correctly instead of all in one business account, investing more and having a separate savings. Absolutely. Listen, and I talk about this often. I teach financial literacy, or I teach on this aspect of financing, not from some ivory tower of which I have done it well. I've literally done every horrible choice that you can make with money in my 20s, every single one of them. Student loans, cars, credit cards, all of the stupid stuff. I did all of them. And so if I'm in any tower, it's a tower that has been built by brick and mortar that I have laid by myself. And every brick is a choice I've made, and every mortar is the mistakes that I've made. Right. And so I hope for people not to have to go through that personal experience in order to figure it out. But the idea is that it doesn't just naturally happen. You don't just automatically start saving. Again, the be do have, you don't automatically start having a savings account. You have to do the activity of saving, of cutting those things, of pulling back on certain areas, of being intentional, right? Same thing with becoming the person who is conscious of those choices, is looking at the bank account daily or weekly and making sure that you're making those choices that are appropriate. You know, none of you use probably a balance sheet anymore in your checkbook, right? You're not looking at those things. So being very intentional about where those things are. I know some other versions of this, some tips that I've given in the past is like, we have an online savings account with a different bank, right? And so for us, we use Ally. Ally's got a really great interest rate currently on your savings account. And part of the reason for that is that we bank primarily with Chase. If I can have access to it, I don't trust myself. So I create barriers to make things harder for myself. So by having that money in a separate account, if I wanted to just transfer that over to a general fund, it's going to take 3 business days. I really have to contemplate whether or not it's worth it to be able to do that. And just building that little bit of a buffer for those of you who are shiny object, or those of you who might be impulse buyers. And I'm not a particularly again, going back to that book, The Psychology of Money, I'm not a spender, but I'm not a saver naturally either. And so building those things into play to where I'm not holding on to everything, but I'm also don't have access to like do impulse buys is very important to me, right? Know thyself around money, know thyself about productivity, know thyself about distraction. And what do you do with that information? You make sure that your time blocking schedule reflects that. You make sure that your financial choices reflect that. Build those things in that way so that you are helping yourself, not necessarily hindering yourself, right? Ever so often, there are these moments in time in which you say something really good and you're like, wow, I wish that I had quoted myself. And this is one of those. Thankfully, we've been doing a lot of things since COVID online and on video and things that have been recorded. And this is something that was said kind of as an impulse, and it's something that I firmly believe philosophically that I've said, and that I truly, truly believe, that wealth is built in the gap between income and expenses, right? And so often when I talk to coaching clients, they know their income. They know the checks that are coming in. They know how much money they have coming in. They know how many closings they've done. They know all of that stuff. But when I ask them about expenses, it starts to get kind of gray. They don't really keep track of the expenses. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about budgets. They don't want to talk about money. But wealth is built in the gap between income and expenses. You can't just like numbers. And all of you like numbers when they're coming in. You might not like numbers when they're going out. But the idea that wealth is built in the gap between income and expenses, we have to be in love with both sides of this equation to know that the end result is what we're going for, right? You have to love both. A level of awareness around income and expenses. And again, it's a muscle that is to be flexed and toned and built over time. And that's something that, you know, we can absolutely continue to bring at the forefront of our conversations during private coachings, as well as here in a group setting as well. So I said this earlier today, I'm saying it again, which is business planning without accountability is just escapism. It's fantasy, it's role play. Right? You build a vision board and it's like, I want a Maserati, or I want the yellowfin boat, or I want the house in the Aspens, or I want to be debt free, but then my activities support me having more debt and me doing impulse buys or me not working. right? To spend this afternoon with me, and I enjoy seeing so many of you, and I've known many of you for years, and so it's lovely to see all the different backgrounds and places that we know one another, and to be in one space. But to spend an afternoon with me in which we're going to have this conversation, and then you're going to like fold this up, or you're going to download the workbook, and then you're not going to do anything with it. This was just a form of escapism from whatever is going on in your world right now. If you're not hitting your goals right now, and this felt good, or a level of awareness, but then you don't do anything, you don't form any accountability afterwards, this was just an escapism for an afternoon to get away from that kind of cruddy feeling that you've had about certain things that have happened. And I say that with as much love and as passion. My passion doesn't come off like loud or bombastic. Sometimes it doesn't always come off super loving either, but I am truly passionate about you hitting your goals, especially those people that I get to build relationships with for years. I mean, I see your children go to high school. I see your kids graduating and going to college. I see your kids getting married. I see your parents retiring. I see you buy investment properties. Like, I have such a vested interest in seeing those things happening. And it's through Brandon's favorite word, accountability. It's through these conversations and levels of awareness of going, it has to be further than just an afternoon of a free workshop. You have to do the accountability, whether it's with me, it's with an accountability partner, it is free, it is paid, but you have to have accountability. Otherwise, this has just been a really great afternoon stroll, the equivalent of you watching Game of Thrones or Netflix, if I do say so myself, right? These are real results that we're seeing with our clients so far this year, year over year, right? Their first half of this year versus first half of last year. Conversation I had this morning, a team that's well on their way to do about 1.7 million this year in income has a 41% in income year over year from January through June of this year versus last year, right? Another client just gave themselves a pay raise of $70,000. So they made $70,000 more dollars from January through June of this year versus last year. 58% of growth year over year is someone else that we're working with, right? Now, I say that to be like, not to make you feel bad about yourself, because there are also members of our community that have not necessarily had the results of the first half of the year, but the year is not over. And we're looking at their processes. We're becoming obsessive with their processes, and we're seeing a pipeline that's building that the second half of the year is going to be lucrative for them. It's finally here. I'm so excited for them because we didn't just fixate on, I don't like my results. I don't like my results. I don't like my results. I might not like my results. What am I doing about it? What can I do about it today? What can I do about it this week? What can I do about it this month? What can I be reading? What conversations can I be having around myself? What are some of those things that I can be doing? So we are seeing some people have a really great year. We're seeing some people who are having to reinvent themselves, reinvent their business, adjust to the market, adjust to things. But the idea is that you are building a business for yourself, not by yourself. Join community. Reach out to some of the people that you see here with us that are on this call. If you know someone, again, of course, if I can be of service to you, I'd love to be. If for whatever reason coaching is not in the playing cards for you this year, whether that be financially or commitment or whatever that looks like, find an accountability partner. Find someone who is just as interested in their goals and their growth as you are, right? So we definitely want to make sure that we're doing that as often as we can. We've got a couple more minutes, and I think we have like a slide or two left. But I would love to get some ahas from you. How has this been helpful? What are you walking away from this conversation? What action items are you putting into play? What would you like to do? And again, just as a reminder, please download the workbook that Shantae spent a lot of time building for you all. It has weekly planners, it has daily planners, it has annual calendars. It also has information for you on previous classes and courses that we've done. It has a breakdown of building a business plan for the second half of the year. There's a lot of really great handouts and things that are useful for you. If some of them don't make sense, some of them are using different language because maybe it's our language within the coaching community that you're not familiar with. Even if you're not a coaching client, please send me an email or reach out to me. I'm more than happy to answer your questions. But what I'm looking at more than anything right now is ahas, observations, insights, things that you're getting from this time that we've spent together, because the idea is not just learning for learning's sake, it's learning for earning's sake. So Mary said, you need to invest in yourself first before you can accomplish anything else. I definitely do want to work on organizing my financial goals so it's better to digest and I understand my main goals instead of just day to day. Absolutely. Naveen said, this has been so eye-opening. You pretty much say what we don't want to think about, which is forcing us to refocus. Absolutely. You know, and again, it's you can call it tough love, you can call it whatever you want, but the idea is, what do we do with that level of awareness? What is the next step forward that we can be focused on? Shantae said, really inspired by the financial suggestions, different bank accounts, splitting money into 4 quadrants, looking at it. Yeah, I mean, before we can set goals around them, even just simply looking at it from the perspective of, what have I done previously and what would I like to do in the future, right? So if I want to put 10% away, if I want to invest $500 every month towards a particular area, being intentional around that can really make a huge difference. First is just observing what's happening, and then we can make those adjustments. It's not going to happen overnight. In the same way that you don't go from couch to Ironman, right? Or couch to 5K as the app is built. You really do have to take some of that time to focus on those things. Chelsea said the busyness versus business is something that was insightful for her. Just really kind of looking at what are those activities that would be classified as busy work versus what are those things that are actually moving my business forward, right? What are those income producing activities that are focused on client acquisition, client retention, and getting those clients to have that possible 10 plus experience, right? Someone who teaches a wonderful class on customer experience is Miss Mashonda Smith. If ever she has a chance of doing that again, I definitely suggest that you go and attend it, because it's one that is all over my business and something that I know that many of the people here have really taken stride with. You're very welcome, Mashonda. Let's see, one more. Let's get one more aha, and then we'll move on. Anyone that we've not heard from? They're like, I'm here, but I'm not really here. Let's see, or are they dropping off? No shiny objects. There it is, Stephanie. Good to see you. So no shiny objects doesn't mean that they don't happen, right? Again, just in the same way of talking about from a financial place of making every mistake, I still find myself sometimes where it's like you went down a rabbit hole of watching videos on social media, or you were intentionally going on to interact with other people's pages, and then you just started consuming social media as opposed to participating on social media, or distractions of maybe tinkering with website or tinkering with something on Canva. You know, again, when you recognize the shiny object, the idea is to minimize the time from the distraction to getting back on task. It's not to say that we're never not going to have distractions, that we're never not going to have shiny objects. The concept here is to minimize that so that we get to a place to where maybe we're distracted for a minute or 2 minutes. You know, I use an example of when I first started in business and thought that the way of going about it was to do cold calling. I remember, you know, getting into the office and I would do my script practice and I would pull my list and I'd get ready to go and I'd make my calls. And if, you know, within the first 15 minutes, someone was rude or, you know, not very nice, or they used certain words, I'd be like, oh, nope, tomorrow's a new day. And I would dismiss an entire day because of someone throwing off the first 15 minutes. And it took a while before I realized that I was wasting an entire day, as opposed to start again at 10 a.m. or start again at 9:30 or start again in the afternoon. It's why do we allow something to affect us and let it ruin our entire day versus it ruining maybe an hour or two? It's the same concept when we talk about shiny objects. The shiny objects are going to come in, they're going to go, but your level of awareness of identifying them when they're there, going, this is not serving me right now, and going on. Or that's a great idea. Let's add it to the notebook. And that's something for us to implement maybe when we're doing business planning in December. Or maybe it's something to revisit in October at the beginning of the 4th quarter. The idea is that if I know that it wasn't a part of, like, I spent all this time building a plan to execute on a plan, and then I'm going to allow some impulse thing come about that I'm now going to ditch all of that data, all of that insight, all of that thought. and just go and chase this get rich quick or this diet pill or this, oh, I'm going to be a TikTok star. Nothing against that. But if that was not a part of your initial plan, why now is it a part of it? How is it executable? What is the reasonable ROI of your time and your money, right? So just this concept, I think more than anything, I know that for me personally has been the adjustment of making conscious choices, allowing consciousness and awareness and intentionality in my daily activities. Doesn't mean that it happens on every single one. Just like the mindset of the samurai, it is that carrying with you a level of intentionality into those day-to-day tasks and seeing how those day-to-day tasks accumulate, of which extraordinary results are just ordinary tasks being executed over and over and over again. All right, so the last thing that we want to talk about here is we're going to be rolling out information this week. For many of you, this hopefully was helpful. This is a mid-year business planning. So often we find that people do business planning maybe annually. They might do semi-annual goals like this. Maybe they do things quarterly. Very few people actually build intention around the next 5 years. Do you have an idea of what you want your net worth to look like by 2030? Do you have an idea of what you want your business to look like by 2030? Do you have an idea of what your team looks like or how you're spending your weeks by 2030? And so the idea is that for so many of us, that's such a daunting, huge concept that we just avoid it. And so what we're going to be doing on September 27th and 28th is we're going to have a full 2-day workshop. It's going to be work and play. We're going to be doing this in person over in Daytona Beach at the Halifax River Yacht Club. It's a beautiful facility. The food is amazing. It's a great, great place for us to be so that we can come together. For those of you in Florida but are on the West Coast, this is an opportunity for you to see the East Coast. But we're going to be coming together. If you'd like information about joining us in person for the 2 days, please shoot us an email. You can reach out to me or reach out to Shantae. We can give you further information about it. But I really want to implore you the idea of really taking time, whether this is for you and your spouse. I would encourage you and your spouse to come together and also think like, what do we want retirement to look like? What do we want our personal finances to look like? What do we want our net worth to look like or our investment portfolio to look like? Come together as a couple or come as an individual. The idea of really being intentional about what the next 5 years of your life looks like, something that we're going to be having some fun work and play together. So please reserve your spot and join us. There'll be more information to come out after here. Thank you all so much for spending your time with me. I really, really appreciate you being with me. As you can imagine, teaching these things to a computer with very little interaction doesn't necessarily give the energy and excitement that we all might be looking for. But I love teaching these classes. I love being able to provide value when I can. And more importantly, if I can be of any service to you from an accountability standpoint. Again, you went into business for yourself. You don't have to go to business by yourself. You don't have to do this by yourself. So have a wonderful afternoon. If you need anything, please reach out. And I will see you all on the next one. Take care, everybody.